Hello everybody, and welcome to episode 3 of the Battle of the Rappahannock customized multiplayer game. If you remember in part 2, we went over the first few hours of the gameplay of the battle, and then we left off with Reynolds' flank being threatened by AP Hill's Corps' approach. And we have now moved to the 8 a.m. turn. This is the first turn that both sides have been allowed an open discussion since 6 a.m. And it is the last turn that they will be allowed to discuss anything until 10 a.m. And that's part of the communication rules that we have built into this game. Lee now believed that the majority of federal forces were moving along the Orange and Alexandria Railroad, while those on Ewell's front to the south were moving towards the center to link with them for an offensive drive to the west. With so much activity on the Confederate right flank, the relative inactivity in the north seemed to indicate that the Federals were only playing a defensive game on that side of the battlefield. Hill now disclosed that he had taken the liberty of adjusting Lee's plans of 6 a.m. and had turned to attack the Federals north of Ewell's position. And he told him, "I believe it is our best bet to strike east where we know the enemy to be in some flux. If it is cavalry entirely that Rhodes encounters, we will be delighted. If it is elements of the Union First Corps or others, then that will require concentration of forces. My corps, with the support of Johnson's division, will have a very good chance to inflict some damage. Also, by hitting them from the west and their flank, we may be able to force the units preventing Early's division from crossing the river to withdraw. We may have an opportunity here to isolate and destroy a few enemy units." Lee asked Ewell about his thoughts towards Hill's movements to engage the Federals in the south rather than proceed northward as originally planned. "I'm a bit biased towards an attack here. I would much prefer to have Early free to cross and move north against the enemy that now has him pinned down on crossing guard duty. If it is your preference to send Hill's forces north or northeast, I would still like to send at least Johnson's division to try and force a withdrawal by the enemy from the river crossings, in order to allow Early to advance beyond his current static position." Lee then committed himself to an attack in the south. "I think the axis of General Hill's attack should be to the east and not the north. The arrival of more federal troops from the east cannot be ignored, and if you were to attack north, you'd have to detach such a large flank guard that you wouldn't have enough combat power to do any real damage. It looks very much to me as though the fight will begin at the Embry House and spread south and east. Pender will cross in support of Rhodes, and Johnson will follow Pender over Rogers's Ford." With the Confederate side having their discussion, the Federal side had their own. And the Federals, they continued to discuss the unknowns of the situation on Reynolds' western front. Reynolds started by stating that if the rebels intended to cross the river south of the First Corps, I would have thought them to have done so by now. Whether they cross or not, we shall have to wait and see. At the moment, I don't sense any major threat along our far left flank. Any infantry I observe has been marching west, not east. There may be a certain amount of indecision on this front. We should continue with our current movements unless circumstances change. With so many unknowns, the plan would continue to be the same. Everyone would move to the west. Sickles would move towards the Rappahannock, Barnes to reinforce Gregg's cavalry division at Tin Pot Ford, and the Second Corps to move behind the First Corps and continue to extend Reynolds' flank to the west. Sykes' division would move south to fill the space between Meade and Reynolds and deal with the Confederate cavalry, then dividing the two Union forces. "If we do see a Reb offensive," Hooker wrote, "it is likely to come out of the thick woods to the west of Reynolds. The Rebs like using such cover to conceal their offenses. Take care when moving there." It's good advice. All right, so time for my unasked for 2 cents now that I'm done reading all that. So we've got the two sides on the map here, and let's just begin with the Confederate side. They're making the right moves. Rhodes going to the east as opposed to marching north is exactly what I said was going to happen in the last episode. It didn't make sense for Hill to try to skirt the river and move north while leaving Ewell's corps hung up on the river. So by him turning in this direction, he's going to allow Early to cross the river. Johnston's going to cross earlier. And now you're going to have 4 divisions of Confederate infantry on the northern side of the Rappahannock. It's going to free everything up over there. And that's exactly what they needed to do. Free Early. With him free, the playbook opens up. The left flank. What about the left flank here? When you look at the map, I mean, you draw this line across it, and I guess it is what it is. The plan that they chose concentrated their force on their right flank and in the south, and now they've got about 700 men in total on the northern part of the map and 70,000 on the southern part of the map. Their left flank is in the air, and they just need to figure out a way to deal with it. And I think what they're planning is just to be super aggressive on their right flank and hope that the Federals never attack their left, or maybe send any troops on that side over to the middle or to the south. For the Federals, their instincts are correct. They know something's going on in these woods. They just don't know what yet. And it's because of a lack of reconnaissance there. It's that simple. They have eyes all throughout the south, but there is just a total lack of intel in this area here. There might as well be a cloud over it, for all they know. They have no idea what's coming at them right now. And because of that, they assume it's too soon to panic, because they don't have any sense of what's coming at them there. But looking at it from above, I am panicking, because I know that they are about to be slammed into on that flank, and when that happens, Reynolds is going to be in a very bad position. So let's get to the moves. So the 8 a.m. turn now, both sides have moved, and the dance continues around the battlefield here. The Iron Brigade has somehow eluded Rhodes's division again. Both sides do have some skirmishers out, but it's just like a Fred Astaire dance. They just go around, and it's amazing to me that they haven't made contact yet. So here is the map, and you can see that I'm going to take a little part of it here as a dry erase board. And the Iron Brigade is in a very tight spot at the Embry House. Both sides, like I said, they have skirmishers deployed, but they're looking in the wrong directions. For the Federals, they know there's something out there. They've seen some question marks. For the Confederates, they know there's something out there. They've seen some question marks with their mounted cavalry. I think both sides are underestimating what they're about to run into. For the Confederates, it's in their advantage because they far outnumber the Federal side here. And Rhodes is in position now. He's got his entire division wrapped around the Iron Brigade. He's got cavalry support to the north. And once he starts to move, it's going to be a bad, bad morning for the Iron Brigade, as you can see. The only silver lining for this for the Federals is that help is so stinking close. You've got Kilpatrick's division to the south. You've got Cutler at Ellis's Ford. But you know what? They're still looking at Kemper's Ford. And they have not yet sent any sort of reconnaissance out to where Dulles' brigade is or the action is at Fields Ford. They still don't know that there are units crossing there. Caldwell's division of the 2nd Corps is just to the east of the Embry House now. If the Confederates allow the Federals one more turn, they're going to be able to advance to the Embry House and close that window of opportunity to isolate and surround the Iron Brigade. Heading back to the overhead map now. In the center, the horse artillery duel has commenced. Both sides have numerous batteries lined up here, and it's just going to be one long open field artillery contest between the two sides. Already, the Federals have knocked out a number of Confederate guns there. In the north, Jones has withdrawn. After his brief foray against Waterloo Bridge and Davis's Federal troopers, Jones realizes that there are more Federals than he originally planned on encountering in the north. They did catch a glimpse of Birney's infantry coming along the pike, but they aren't quite sure how many Federals there are yet, and we're going to see how they respond to that as we progress. Along the Orange and Alexandria Railroad, Wilcox's division is arriving finally to support Jenkins's brigade, which has been blocking that main route across the river in the center. On to the 8:20 a.m. turn now, and in the south, Rhodes has attacked. It is about time, but it was a well-planned and a well-executed attack. The Iron Brigade is now surrounded on all sides. They aren't quite isolated yet, but they know that they are in a very bad spot. And to their east, Caldwell has halted. And this surprises me. I'm not too sure why Caldwell wouldn't try to rush up immediately and break the Confederate lines swarming out of the woods, but he has halted. I would have thought there'd be a more aggressive Union response, but they have opted to play it incredibly safe and stop Caldwell's division and try to figure out what in the world just happened to the Iron Brigade. Sykes is marching south. He's moving to try and block Imboden, who is riding all over the countryside. While in the center, Wilcox is now dispersing his division, sending brigades in every direction to try to cover as many fords as possible. And the door is closing rapidly on the Iron Brigade. You've got two Confederate brigades now advancing up around from the north, and they are going to block that final road that the Iron Brigade might be able to use to at least prolong this and escape somehow. And with Caldwell's division halted, it's not looking good. All right, the 8:40 a.m. turn now, and the Iron Brigade is nearly surrounded. Let's go ahead and zoom in and take a look at what's going on. Here we have the Embury House with all the Federal and Confederate units on the map. And I think it's safe to say that that escalated fast. Already, you've got this entire force encircling the Iron Brigade. O'Neill, Iverson, Daniel, all of Rhodes's division is now in play, along with support from W.H.F. Lee. Together, they've managed to form this line, blocking the road to the Embury House. It's not a strong line, but it's just enough to where the Federals have halted. And I'm not too sure, like I said before, why they've halted. A quick rush to the west by Caldwell's division would likely break the Confederate hold on the Iron Brigade and allow them to at least escape with some of their units. But as it is now, they're just being abandoned. The skirmishing on Reynolds' left has also started now. Doles' brigade has moved out of the woods and are now skirmishing with Federal units on that flank, directly moving towards the fords across the river. And Pender is coming, and Johnson too, so there are more Confederate units quickly escalating this from what appeared to be a skirmish at first to a full battle on Reynolds' right flank. In the north, Sickles has reached the Rappahannock River. It's been a long march, but he is now ready to move to the other side of the Rappahannock. In the center, Barnes and Wilcox have arrived to relieve the cavalry forces who have been facing each other for the last few hours. They are bringing with them more artillery, and I believe it's going to get a lot noisier there as both sides are bringing their artillery into play. All right, it's at this point where the Federals had had enough. It was time for an emergency meeting. What was going on here? Both sides get two emergency meetings. The first thing they did was have a status report, try to figure out what is going on. Hooker began by saying that we have confirmed the Rebs are moving in force north of the Rappahannock River to the west of Reynolds. Thus, the basic question as to whether the Rebs will act offensively or defensively has been answered for the moment. My take is that this force is maneuvering to cripple Reynolds and to cripple our army rather than to attack the key depots along the Orange and Alexandria Railroad. Hooker then asked Reynolds if he could hold his current position in the south. With the Confederates swarming around the Iron Brigade and thousands more crossing at Kemper's Ford, Reynolds was not hopeful he could hold his isolated position. I can marginally delay and possibly frustrate them, but holding them off in a stand-up battle, that's extremely doubtful. Hooker then asked whether or not they should retreat with Reynolds or continue to fight there. Reynolds felt that he could hold for a period of time if the rebels were not reinforced and were attacking him with only one corps of infantry. I can either defend or retreat, but not both. My window for the latter becomes more difficult with each passing minute. If this is it, then I can deal with it. I think they will try to flank me more to the north, but unless they are reinforced, it might prove insufficient. I will continue to hold a defensive line unless ordered otherwise. Sickles then spoke up to state his belief that Reynolds should fall back to the north, where he could join with Hooker's own Grand Division and be in a position to mutually support one another. Sickles would continue his march and look to get on the flank and rear of the Confederates and flip the battlefield around. Reynolds seemed to like this. He stated that a controlled withdrawal by my force will shorten the distance for our forces to provide mutual support. If the Rebs follow, it might bring them to a point where we could strike a counterblow. It will also buy some time for Sickles' forces to advance. There is a risk in either defending or retreating, but if we are to retreat, we must do so immediately. Hooker now issued some new orders. Reynolds would begin his withdrawal at once in order to move to the mutual support of Hooker's Grand Division to the north. Reynolds would defend with his right flank and allow the 1st Corps enough time to pull back from the Rappahannock line and march north. Sickles would begin crossing the Rappahannock along the Warrenton Pike and move towards the Hazel River and the left and rear of the Confederate Army. Barnes's division would defend the Orange and Alexandria Railroad crossing over the Rappahannock, while both Crawford's and Sykes' divisions swung south to establish a closer connection to Reynolds. Overall, it was a timeout well spent. You've only got 2 of these, and you need to use them when it's crucial. And this was a crucial moment in the game for the Federals to figure out what their plan would be. And everyone is on the same page now, and that's what you want. Anytime you do have an open communication period, you need to make sure that everyone gets together, figures out what they're doing, and can move forward. And they made the right decision to fall back, and that's important. They got together, they talked it out, and they figured out the correct solution was to fall back with Reynolds. Having him move to the north and try to link with Hooker is definitely the right move. Also, sadly, the Iron Brigade cannot be saved, and I don't think anybody even suggested that it could. In the south, down here, you can see that the noose is getting tighter around the Iron Brigade. They've been completely cut off, and there's no attempt being made by the Federals to relieve them. There is action now between Pender and the 1st Corps. Pender's brigades have moved up, and they're now pushing along the river road to try to reach the fords and uncover them for Early's division to cross over. In the north, Sickles has crossed over the river now and is moving towards the flank of the Confederate Army. In the center, Barnes and Wilcox are arriving, and let's go ahead and take a look at a close-up view of what's going on there. Here we have a closer view of what's going on, and you can see Tin Pot Ford right there in the middle of the map, and that is the main crossing point between these two forces. Both are moving to block it and to keep the other held back, and also to bring up as many guns as possible. And Wilcox is spread out. He's got Posey moving to the north, he's got Bryan moving over to the south, he's got Wright in the woods there building breastworks, and he's left 3 brigades to try to somehow block the Federals at Tin Pot Ford. And it's all open ground on both sides. There's really not much cover to utilize. Barnes is arriving from the other side of the river, and he's bringing his guns along with 5th Corps guns with him. And it's going to be an artillery duel. Like I said, there's a lot of land here with practically no cover, and neither side has full control over that ford. And the only way I believe that both sides feel they can either hold or take that ford is to blast the enemy away from it. So I expect a whole lot of artillery to be brought up in this area. On to the 9:20 a.m. turn now. And if we look at McLaws here, you will see he is beginning to move to the north and the Hazel River. And this is in response to the earlier reconnaissance done by Jones's cavalrymen, which spotted Federal infantry moving across the river there. He's bringing 4 brigades with him, and he's leaving Kershaw's brigade at Brandy Station. To the east, Reynolds's is starting to retreat. He already has 2 divisions of 2nd Corps moving to the north, while the brigades from the 1st Corps and Caldwell's division try to hold back and fight a rearguard action against the Confederates. And it is official now, the Iron Brigade is fully isolated, with Rhodes's entire division surrounding them. On to the final turn here of this episode number 3, the 9:40 a.m. turn. In the south, Early crosses the river in pursuit of Reynolds. With Reynolds falling back, he is now able to cross over safely and join in the battle occurring north of the river. Here is a better view of what's going on the southern part of the battlefield. And let's just go ahead and highlight the Rappahannock River there. And also you can see the numerous different fords which were previously covered by the Federal infantry. And without them there, the Confederates are advancing really along the entire front. You have Rhodes there, Pender, Johnson, Hampton's cavalrymen, along with Early's division. And all of these fords are now in Confederate possession. And the Union is retreating. Caldwell's division, the Federal First Corps units, Gibbon, French, they're all starting to move to the north to try to escape this area. To the west, you can see that the Iron Brigade is fully surrounded now and isolated. Moving back to the overhead map, in the center, Sykes drives on Imboden. So it's never a great idea to send infantry after cavalry, but in this instance, it was really the only option the Federals had. Sykes has reached that area, though, and he is closing the gap between the forces of Reynolds and the forces of Hooker's in the center. And he's doing that by driving Imboden back across the river. In the center, the artillery duel continues. As I mentioned, there's just nothing but open ground here, and both sides continue to bring up more and more artillery. It's now time for my unasked for 2 cents, which I always give during these videos. And let's begin with the Confederates. And Ewell is showing great initiative to advance without orders against Reynolds. He wasn't ordered to move against the flank of the Federals. He just did it on his own. Once the fords were uncovered, he took the initiative to move, and that's exactly what you want from your subordinate in a battle like this. McLaws moving north. Is it already too late? The Confederates know that there's some Federal infantry coming from the north, but they aren't quite sure how many. Nonetheless, it is a 7-mile-long line along the Hazel River with numerous crossing points, and the Confederates are only sending 4 brigades to the north, and one of those brigades is a completely green brigade with nothing but E-rated infantrymen who really couldn't stop anyone. So it's going to be a very trying task to try to hold the Hazel River line against any determined Federal force. And what if Wilcox can't hold? If his line breaks while McLaws is fighting along the Hazel River line against Birney's advancement, they're going to be caught between 2 forces and potentially destroyed. So it is a risky move to make. My last point is, what's the holdup with the Iron Brigade? They've had the Iron Brigade surrounded for about an hour now. They are now isolated, and yet they are just standing around firing into them repeatedly. When you have units isolated, attack them. There's no point to just continue to shoot them up. You're wasting your ammunition. You're wasting time. Already, they've wasted numerous turns when they could have already meleeed them, bagged them, and moved on. So this is something to watch, because with each turn, more Federals escape, and Rhodes just sits there beating a dead horse. On the Union side, you know what? Losing the Iron Brigade hurts. It really does. From a mental standpoint, you're thinking to yourself, wow, we just lost our best brigade on the field. We're screwed. And they need to figure out a way to overcome that. Right now, the Iron Brigade is actually doing them a heck of a favor, because they've held up an entire Confederate division now for a couple of turns, and it's allowing Reynolds more time that he needs to escape. And they are making the right decisions right now, but I'm sure it just doesn't feel like it. They are advancing with Birney, and they are falling back with Reynolds, and those are the correct moves. They just haven't paid off yet, and they will. This is a long game, and the Confederates definitely are winning the first round. Everything now comes down to whether the Federals can win the next round. And in order to do that, they need to stick to their plan. They need to keep moving forward with Sickles' Grand Division in the north and continue what they started at the beginning of this battle, which is to attack the Confederate left. Reynolds needs to move like greased lightning. He cannot get held up down here in the south. This does have me a bit concerned. I'm not sure how concerned yet, but he seems to be having an awful lot of units staying in battle line rather than just switching to column and getting the heck out of Dodge. They need to move. It's a long scenario, and as I mentioned, it's going to be a while until the Federals can really execute an offensive plan. Sickles had a long way to march, and he still has a long way to march. So they can't dwell on what's happened here in round one. They need to get over it. They need to fall back, regroup, and move forward with the plan that they now have in place. So what am I looking forward to in the next part? Well, can Reynolds get away? He's being given a gift of time by the holdup of the Iron Brigade, and for whatever reason, the Confederates' lack of drive to just melee him and be done with him. So the Iron Brigade is buying Reynolds time, and he needs to utilize it. The Hazel River. With McLaws moving in that direction and the Federals moving in large force from the opposite direction, what is going to happen along the Hazel River? Lastly, the artillery duel in the center. Both sides continue to bring up fresh batteries, and it's just going to get bigger and bigger as they try to force the other side to retreat away from that area. All right, well, thank you guys for watching. This is the end of episode 3, and I hope to see you back here for episode 4 coming up next.